All right, we'll move on to our second name here, and that is defenseman Noah Hanifin. Of course, he is expected to be, maybe the last pending UFA to go out of the Calgary Flames organization. He's made it clear of where he wants to go. There's still a chance that he goes elsewhere besides the team that he really wants to go to and extend long term, mind you. And Chad, you've got him reuniting with his old general manager in Calgary, who brought him in that blockbuster trade with the Carolina Hurricanes all those years ago. You've got Noah Hanifin going to your Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, you said it off the top. Hanifin has expressed his desire to go to the Tampa Bay Lightning, so that can't be ignored. That has to be said. But just from a Maple Leafs perspective, I think this is exactly the type of player you need. I know he doesn't shoot right. He doesn't play the right side. So people are already giving me grief for this. But I think you need a guy in Toronto to anchor your second pair for the next, until the end of this window. That's something they've never had in the Matthews era. I mean, aside from a Jake Muzzin, I guess, but it seems like we haven't had Jake Muzzin in the lineup in forever. So you need a guy behind Riley to play on a separate pair, so then you have two studs on the back end. I think that's what you need. None of this right-hand shot, bruising defenseman stopgap that, where he's not able to move the puck. Like, I'm sick of that. Go get Noah Hanifin. Okay, that's what I think. So the complicated thing is, we've already mentioned Hanifin wants to go to Tampa Bay, but it's also been widely reported that he doesn't want to play in Canada. Now, the thing is, he doesn't have trade protection against being traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, so this could happen. And then I think if this deal does go through, it's on the Leafs to essentially convince him to stay. Like this happens, seldomly, but it has happened where a player says, I don't want to get traded to this team. And then the player goes there and then ends up signing long term. So, that is the situation in my hypothetical world that I'm banking on here. So anyways, here's the trade. And by the way, the Leafs will have like nearly $4 million on deadline day. So they would need some retention. But probably not double retention. And we don't actually know the asking price of Hanifin right now. I don't think it's been out there, but just judging based on what Tanev got and what some other defensemen have fetched around the league, I think it starts with a first round pick and a prospect, and then we'll see from there. So here's my deal.
Okay.
To the Leafs, Noah Hanifin with retention to make the cap work. To Calgary, their first round pick in 2024, Nick Robertson, who has expressed some desire to be moved, let's say. He hasn't outright requested a trade, but he has shown that he's not happy currently on the Maple Leafs, being outside of the lineup. Nick Abruzzese, who the Flames have expressed interest in the past, and Ryan Twerberg. And I think if you're able to do this, and so by the way, it breaks down a first round pick, a good roster player now who's young in Nick Robertson, and two, I would say like B-level prospects. Maybe they're a bit lower than that, depending who you ask. But that's essentially how the value breaks down, in my opinion, and what I could expect from this deal. But if you're able to do that for the Maple Leafs and you don't give up Cowan, Minton, or Niemela, that would be an absolute dream. But I do think, or Nyes, by the way, but Nyes, I don't even think is being entertained at all in any of these deals.
I don't think so either.
And it sounds like Minton and Cowan aren't either, but I think that could be a mistake if you're not willing to move pieces who won't help you for the next 3 years to get better now. That's just my opinion, but I don't think they'll be moved. So if you're able to keep those two and Niemela, I think that's an absolute win. But the Flames will be asking for one of those guys for sure. Oh, yeah. And you just have to try to sweeten the pot. So that's what I came up with. If it's not Nick Robertson, maybe it's Timothy Liljegren as a good young player on the roster who, has sort of been passed in a way. He's played great for stretches this year, but he's also looked a bit out of place given more minutes. And then if it's not Abruzzese, maybe it's Steves, who's a player who is, dominating the AHL this year. And if it's not Twerberg, maybe it's Niemela. But I will say Twerberg's name has been out there. And I'm not even sure if many people are familiar with him.
I am not at all. Like,
okay,
I have seen that name before, but just tell me about this player for a little bit.
Well, he has 28 points in 37 games in the AHL this year. And what I know is he has sort of flown under the radar to this point in his career, but his name has started to get out there in terms of trade talks, and his value is going up around the league. So without getting into too much detail, that's my trade. I think it's a first-round pick, a young player off the roster, and a couple prospects. Now, you can kind of take a guy out, plug a guy in, but I think the value is kind of there. It just depends whether Brad Treliving is going to have to pay a bit of a tax, considering he was the former GM of the Flames, which I think is ridiculous, but that's just how it works. So what do you think about that trade? Deal or no deal if you're the Flames?
Well, first of all, I mean, you said it right there before you got into your trade that Hanifin has expressed a desire to go back to the United States and not play in Canada. However, we heard the same thing about Jake McCabe last year. We can't forget that. And he ended up, being a Toronto Maple Leaf. And if there's anyone who knows Hanifin who could convince him to come to the Toronto Maple Leafs and be paid very well on a long-term deal, no doubt, it would be Brad Treliving, I feel like. Even though Matthew Tkachuk decided to leave the Calgary Flames and go to the Florida Panthers, we heard the things that he had to say about Brad Treliving in the playoffs last year, how complimentary he was of him and what a great guy he is, and how Treliving really cares about his players. And so I think if there's anyone who could turn around Hanifin's thinking on that, plus it's Toronto. It's like there's Canada and then there's Toronto when it comes to playing hockey. And yes, the pressure is there, but first class treatment all the way through and everything. And so maybe Treliving would be able to convince Hanifin otherwise on that. I agree. You're not moving Cowan and Minton because you can't move all of your top prospects, and they're going to need those guys probably as soon as next season to step into the lineup and contribute on entry-level deals when you are going to be right up against the cap again with Matthews' 4-year extension kicking in and Nylander's 8-year deal kicking in, just to name a few. However, I would consider including a guy like Niemela in this deal. Maybe that, puts the price down just a little bit. And, so you do a first in Robertson and maybe Niemela. Maybe that gets it done. But I guess it all depends on what Conroy and the Flames would be looking for there. But I will say deal on this one. I like it. But if again,
you're Toronto, here's the second question for you. If you're Toronto and you know that Hanifin isn't going to extend, he's told you that on trade deadline day.
Yeah.
When are you still making that deal and hoping you can convince him? And paying all those assets for, 25 games plus a playoff run? Or are you going elsewhere and getting, a player like David Savard or someone?
Well, I mean, Savard doesn't want to leave Montreal, and foot speed is certainly an issue with him. And, I know that they brought in Ilya Lyubushkin, and I feel like that was some frustration out of you there, the fact that they brought him back. And
I don't hate him. Yeah. I don't hate him. He's just I just know that he's not a fix. He's a stopgap.
Well, he is, exactly. They're going to need to add another defender. I don't think you do this, though, if it's clear that Hanifin does not want to re-sign. And again, you never say never. I feel like, Tree Living could do this and be like, well, you know what? I will give it my best shot. We will, as an organization, to convince him to stay. But if you don't have that feeling that you're going to be able to do that, I would be looking elsewhere. For example, Nick Jensen in Washington, just as an example.
What if, follow up to this, what if you have a crystal ball that says Noah Hanifin will re-sign for 8 years at the Riley number, say 7.5, the rumored deal that he was offered in Calgary.
Yeah.
What if you have a crystal ball that says he will sign that deal at that reasonable number? Do you include Fraser Minton or Easton Cowan, Topi Niemela, etc.? Is that enough value in return to send one of those guys?
Niemela, yes, and maybe Minton. I mean, he, because like Kamloops Blazers, Western League guy, whatever, like Calgary would be very familiar with him. Not Easton Cowan, just because, he was your first rounder in a very strong draft last year, and look at what he's doing with the London Knights in the OHL. So, I would consider that for sure if you're able to have him come in and sign an extension right away, or commit to that verbally after the season.